In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Just had to give some love to somebody in the pew. That's all I was doing. But it's interesting to hear the gospel read out there, especially by the speaker right there. That's a whole new experience for us up here. We don't get to do that very often. That was helpful. All righty, folks, here we go. The Gospel of Mark. This is the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. This is how it begins. And notice, in this beginning, there is not the angels, there's not the shepherds, there's not all that beautiful imagery that we expect when we hear about the beginning of Jesus' ministry. You know, Mark and the Gospel of John, so the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of John, are similar in that they don't have all of that pomp and circumstance. You know, Matthew and Luke, Matthew's very Joseph-focused, Luke is very Mary-focused. And Luke's the one we think of on Christmas Eve. That's the one where the kids line up and do the pageant. This one wouldn't lend itself to the pageant very well. I guess we could have one child with locust and wild honey come barreling down the aisle in the most obnoxious way possible, almost offensive, if you will, and that might come close to capturing John and what John is all about. Might come close. It'd have to be pretty darn obnoxious to get close to John, because John is all full of all sorts of life. Y'all make sure y'all scoot in. Let's make some room. I see lots of room. Let's scoot in. Let this beautiful family in here. Alrighty. But what I love about the beginning of the Gospel of Mark is that it tells you right up front what's going on. This is the good news of Jesus Christ. And Mark's going to bookend. It's going to do this periodically throughout the Gospel. And at the end, so there's the end we all think of, and if you have a study Bible, you'll see there's two endings to Mark. There's early manuscripts that cut it off a little bit earlier than later manuscripts. So the original ending of Mark, you have two major things happening that mirror this very beginning. One is the centurion is the first person besides the demons in the Gospel of Mark who says to us, the reader, and models for us, as Jesus has just died on the cross and the earthquake has happened, he says, surely this was God's Son. Surely this is God's Son, present tense. And in that earlier ending, you have the women who come to the empty tomb, but you have no resurrection appearances of Jesus. So you have the women who come to the tomb looking for the body so they can roll away the stone and anoint it and mourn and grieve, and they come to an empty tomb because they were expecting to see Jesus, to see the Messiah, to see their Lord in the tomb. And the gospel ends. So it's very different than what we think of. And the Gospel of Mark is so full of this imagery and this calling to where we look. Last week, Mother Sarah did a fantastic job, I thought, because I needed to hear it, of talking about how we train our eyes to see. How we train our eyes to see, to begin to see God around us. And then we come into this moment with John the Baptist in the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, and we're reminded that it's, where are we looking for God? So we train our eyes to see, but then where are we looking? And the story of Jesus doesn't begin in Jerusalem. It doesn't begin in the epicenter of religion. It doesn't begin at the temple. It doesn't begin in a royal castle. It begins on the margins. And not only that, it begins at the River Jordan, where the Israelites leaving Egypt crossed over and came into the Promised Land. It's there. And not only that, Jesus, to jump ahead and take some liberties, if we were to follow the Gospel of Mark from today's reading, Jesus is going to be baptized and then go further into the wilderness and to face all of the temptations that we face as humans, so that we truly can say that God was tempted in every way we are and yet did not sin. So that we worship and believe in a God who truly knows our struggle. Jesus is going to spend most of his ministry on the margins, most of his ministry not where you expect him. And the classic example of that, and I've used this example before because it is such a powerful example, the Pharisee and the tax collector in the temple. Pharisee, short of just saying, thank God I'm not like that guy, Short of saying that, the Pharisees done everything. Pharisees been in church. Pharisees tried to follow the law. Pharisees done all these things you would expect to be, minus maybe a little dose of humility, but for the most part, you would think that's a representation of the kingdom. They've done everything they're supposed to do. That's where you would expect Jesus to say, hey, be like the Pharisee. But instead, he looks at the tax collector who probably swindled people out of money, probably drives a Ferrari or a Ferrari chariot, whatever the case may be in the time and place, has the latest iPhone or Scribe, has all of that because they've taken advantage of folks. And yes, he's beating his breast, but that's where Jesus says, be like that. Don't be so caught up in what everybody else is doing. Be like that. And it all points always to where you least expect it. And these readings got me thinking about something that many of you don't know about me, but I love, love, love art history. It's one of 2 AP courses I took in high school that I passed. So art history and U.S. history, I got a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. Chemistry, English, on a scale of 1 to 5. So that didn't go so well for me. And then a few others that I won't name that I got 2s on, but we'll leave those where they are. Moral of the story, young people in the room, don't try to be like your brother. Just be you. You're good enough. Anyways, I loved art history. I took electives in college. It was what I just enjoyed. And there was 3 paintings that came to mind as I was thinking about this sermon, where you see one thing and you miss so much more. And the first one is Ophelia by Sir John Millais. And this Ophelia painting, or the painting of Ophelia, is based off of Hamlet. And it's kind of morbid, and to some degree, although the painting doesn't look morbid, the subject matter is morbid. Ophelia is lying in a river, and she's getting ready to drown, to pass away from drowning. But her face is still above water. But you look at the painting, you're noticing all of this, and and if you've thought about it, you're thinking about the play Hamlet, you're thinking about Shakespeare, you're thinking about how the artist captures all of the facial expressions, the clothing that Ophelia is wearing. It's all right there in the middle of the painting. And you miss all this stuff around usually because your eye's just drawn in. One could say this about the Mona Lisa, that people miss all the little stuff in the back, the colors and the work. But what's interesting is the artist took so long to paint this. So Sir John took so long to paint this that he would go by the river. And what you notice is when the painting started, I believe it, don't quote me on this, I think it was fall. So the flowers that are closest to Ophelia, closest to the stream, are fall flowers, and then you see winter, and then you see spring, and then you see summer all the way on the edges of the painting. So it makes no sense. But you miss it because you're so focused. You just, oh, what beautiful flowers. When in actuality, as you go to the edge of the painting, you're like, wait, those flowers don't fit. That's not the right season. And it just messes with you because you're so focused on the subject matter. Now, is this important in the grand scheme of art history? No. But it just goes to show us how if we don't train our eye to see the whole painting, we can miss those beautiful details. Another one, a little less famous, and I'm trying to remember his name, Jorge, A Day in the Park, in the park in Paris in the River Seine. It's an aristocratic painting. It's a modernist painting. So the shapes are all like perfect circles, and it's beautiful. Looks like a normal painting in the park, right? Everybody's just in the park. And what you miss is around this painting, and almost if you see it online, it looks like it's just in a frame. But Jorge had painted every single color that's in the main part of the painting has been woven into this little strip of what looks like a frame. Every single color, the blues, the greens, the reds, in a way that speaks harmoniously to itself. But you're so focused on the main painting, you don't notice this beauty around the outside because you're drawn into who's in the park, what's going on in the park. Those are weird clothes to wear to the park. Thank God we don't wear those clothes today. And you miss this little piece, this beauty that's on the margins, that's on the outside of the painting. And the last one's a Manet. The Bar at Folie Bergère. I don't know how many of you have seen this painting. This one's kind of famous. Go ahead and raise your hands, people. If I'm going to be a little nerdy, we can all be nerdy together, okay? All right, so this is a typical Manet painting. He's always playing with you. It's a bar in Paris, and as Manet likes to do, he plays with mirrors. So behind the bar is a mirror. So you see the barmaid looking at you, and then off to your right in the painting, you see her back and the gentleman that she must be serving at the bar. And then behind that, you see kind of classes of people gathered at this bar. And it's so funny, when you hear people talk about this painting, they're so focused on how Manet's done all the detail. It's a very black and white, very little color in this painting. And you can kind of see the different classes of people as they go back. And the really important aristocratic class is very obvious up front, and then it kind of goes back. Great and wonderful. You're kind of drawn into this. And you kind of see, you're trying to wonder, what's the barmaid talking? Because she has a weird grin on her face. And the gentleman, you just don't know what's going on there. What's he talking about? What's going on? So you're drawn into that. And up in the corner of the painting, and it often gets missed. Does anybody know what I'm about to say? Come on, people. Or you're going to go home and Google this. The bar at Folie Bergère. There's these green feet. Little green feet up in the top of the painting. And it's a person on trapeze. So amidst the seriousness of this painting, when you're so focused on the content, you're wondering, because this is what you're wondering when you look at it. All of y'all are like, that's not what I'm wondering. I'm wondering when you're going to finish talking about it. But when you're wondering about what this painting says, you miss it. And it brings a little bit of color and a little bit of life, but it's just up in that top corner. And if you don't train your eyes to see all the different aspects of the painting, you miss it. I mean, I missed it for years. It's actually the one question I missed on my AP Art History exam that I found out was that one. Hence the fact I'm still bitter about it. But there are, and it brings in this playful side of Manet, because he's always drawing you into one thing so that you'll miss the other thing. I say all this to you, A, I love art history, that's probably clear. B, because that is exactly what the kingdom does to us. We believe that we have it all figured out. We believe that we can go up to people and say, this is what the church should do. I've got it all figured out. It makes me happy. Yay for me. And yet God comes on the scene and pops up in the least expected places. And he trains our eyes to look where we least expect. Think of where Jesus spends his ministry. Where do we find God present? He's not present with the Pharisees. He's with the tax collectors. He's with the sinners. He's hanging out with those folks. He's constantly telling us, hey, quit judging. Let me handle that. Why don't you just be in relationship? Quit focusing on how you're not like that guy to the Pharisee, and maybe you should beat your breast and be repentant. And that's what John the Baptist is doing, because he's bringing the people from Jerusalem are coming out to see what John's all about. What is John doing in the wilderness? What is he saying? What is he proclaiming? And here's where God's going to come on the scene and be baptized out here on the margins, not in the city center of Jerusalem, not in the epicenter of where you would expect God to appear. God is going to appear out there on the margins of the tent. And it's where the ministry is going to happen. And Jesus, throughout his ministry, is going to cross all sorts of borders and boundaries. He's going to do the things we don't expect, because our eyes, just like the Pharisees, will struggle with Jesus. Our eyes and our training tell us one thing, and then Jesus constantly takes that and twists it, and puts it back on self-growth, spirituality, growing for ourselves. This culminates for me, and there's a passage in 2 Corinthians, I believe, or 1 Corinthians. I don't remember the exact passage, but Paul even admits, so this is St. Paul talking to the church in Corinth, and he talks about the fact that he doesn't even know why he does things. He literally says, I don't know what motivates me to do this. I don't know what motivates you to do what you're doing. But what matters is we're listening to God and we're focusing on God in our own life. I'm not so much worried about your relationship with God. I'm worried about my relationship with God and how my relationship with God can transform your relationship with God. Notice that's a very big shift in the way that people interpret Christianity today. A lot of what we do is preach to folks. We slap things up on doors of churches. It doesn't doesn't make sense. What gives us the right to do that? We can spend more of our time focused on our relationship with God and how we can train our eyes to see God at work in the world around us, to go to places where we're uncomfortable and bring the gospel, but not in a preachy way, in a humble, relationship-first driven way. You know, when Jesus tells us to love our neighbor and to love God, that is no easy task, but we have to do it. If we would spend more time, I think, loving God and loving our neighbor, we would not be as offended as Christians. We're so easily offended by folks who talk about Christianity because we're so obsessed with protecting God that we forget that, A, God doesn't need our protection. God needs us to proclaim. Not protect, proclaim. And that God needs us to be in relationship. It's not a one-way street. And we'd spend more time doing that work, the better we would be to receive our King on Christmas. So Advent is that time where we train our eyes to begin to be and to see God and then look for God, not just in the expected places, but in the unexpected places. And in those unexpected places, let's be a place where God happens for somebody else. Not because we have it all figured out, because we don't have it all figured out. And just be in relationship and meet people right where they are. Amen.